Welcome to the Agents of Innovation podcast, where we feature conversations with entrepreneurs, philanthropists, and artists. Well, welcome back to the Agents of Innovation podcast. I am your host, Francisco Gonzalez. We're here in West Palm Beach, Florida today, and I'm here with my guest, Matt Stone. Matt, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be on.
And Matt is, you could tell by his young looks, he's 19 years old. Matt, I think you might be the youngest person on my podcast now.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, it's an honor.
Yeah. Well, it's an honor to have you. Matt also was recently married this year, so
Yep.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
And, he also does not go to college. He has a lot of different...
That is true.
A lot of different types of work he does. We're going to get into that. But the way that I met Matt, and one of his ways that he's more famous is at 19 years old, of course, is he is well known in many different circles as an Elvis Presley tribute artist.
Yep, that's right. That's the new politically correct way to say it, you know.
We're going to get into that because, anyway, I first learned of Matt through seeing him not too far. We're actually here in Palm Beach, right behind us. If you can see this on YouTube, we have the beautiful Palm Beach Island. The breakers out here behind my head. It's just a really beautiful day out here. So we're sitting in West Palm Beach looking over to really one of the most wealthy areas in the country right here.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Palm Beach, Florida. And Henry Flagler, brought that railroad down many years ago and helped populate this area. But there's another island just to the north called Singer Island. And I saw Matt perform at the Islander.
Yeah, the Islander Grill and Tiki Bar, it's called. It's in the Palm Beach Shores Resort.
And so I was there thanks to our mutual friend Ben Starling. I saw Ben one day a couple months ago post on Facebook a picture with you, I think, and he said, Matt is an Elvis tribute artist, and I was like, I'm a huge Elvis fan, Ben. I was like, when is he performing again? And he's like, well, he's here on many Tuesday nights. So I said, great. So I went the next week, and but anyway, here's a few things that really intrigued me about Matt. First of all, I thought this guy is only 19. He's already married. He doesn't go to college. He's mastered singing songs from more than a half century ago from artists like Elvis Presley. And I think this man is living in a different time.
For sure. Absolutely. I mean, it's very difficult to live in a generation such as my own where America has just changed so much over the past couple decades, and we've really lost our sense of direction in a lot of ways. So I think the more that we could remember the past and remember what a fantastic country we had just, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, and so forth, it really does help to bring back those memories when times were calmer and everybody loved America and people were happier.
Yeah, and speaking of loving America, Elvis Presley loved America, and I think also just he's a great American figure.
Absolutely.
And it's nice to just recall, when I was sitting there at the Islander Tiki Bar and Grill, is that the name?
Yeah, that's the full name. I just call it the Islander usually.
Yeah, on Singer Island. It was actually my first time. I don't know if I had ever been on Singer Island before, because it's kind of like I want to say the Riviera Beach exit, and then you go east.
Yeah.
And then you got to go, over a bridge. So, but it's a beautiful island, and of course, there's some hotels and resorts there. And the Islander, that's part of a resort, right?
Yeah, it's part of the Palm Beach Shores Resort. It's the restaurant for the. I would consider it a hotel, but it's actually really big with timeshares. So people buy a timeshare there, and then they come back and reserve their time every year. Yeah. So I get a lot of regular customers who come in and see my show every year.
Oh, that's good, because I was wondering, Ben and I went there. We knew what we were getting into because he had been there before and he was on the island, and I knew I was going there for an Elvis tribute artist. But I was wondering if some people just kind of show up at the restaurant and all of a sudden there's a young man singing Elvis and kind of looking like Elvis. Yeah,
on occasion there are people who are just locals who come in, and which is interesting because usually I wouldn't think of going to a hotel for dinner.
Yeah.
Unless it's the Breakers, which I don't know if you could see in the shot, but it's a beautiful place right over there. But yeah, on occasion, we do get some people who just come in for dinner. A lot of times they hear about the show that's going on and they come for the show, not necessarily just to, eat dinner. But most of the clientele is people from out of town who are coming in and visiting, and just enjoying the beach, and they happened to come in for dinner and stay all night listening to Elvis.
Yeah, no, it's really great. So it was awesome to just kind of sit back and hear a lot of great Elvis tunes. I mean, I think that first night I saw you, I feel like you played like 30 different, sang like 30 different Elvis songs. You got a great voice.
Yeah.
So we're going to go back and, so we're not interviewing Elvis Presley. My mom wanted to remind me, by the way, before I interviewed you. She says, Francisco, you're not interviewing Elvis. Just remember that today. I said, okay, Mom. I remember. But anyway, but we're sitting here and we're interviewing Matt Stone. And so, Matt, I want to know, we're in West Palm Beach at the moment. Where were you born and raised, and where do you live today?
I was born in Wellington, Florida, and raised around the Wellington Lake Worth area, which is 20 minutes from here. Not too bad. Always in Palm Beach County. And when I got married, Palm Beach County, oh my goodness, the real estate since 2020, with the amount of people flooding this state, has gone through the roof. It's like $3,000 a month for a one-bedroom apartment in Boca. Yeah. So we crossed the border into Martin County, which is a little bit, more affordable and still, a stone's throw away from everything. So right now we live at the next county up. Yeah,
so... Yeah, Martin's nice. It's actually really growing. Stewart is in Martin County.
It is,
which is where I saw you as well. But we'll get to that in a few minutes. What I want to ask you a little bit though is you're obviously a very talented singer.
Thank you.
As far as I can tell, unless it's part of the show, but it looks like you also play some instruments.
I do.
So tell us a little bit how you first got into performing music.
Well, when I was about 4 years old, me and my dad used to watch Led Zeppelin all the time, just videos, Song Remains the Same movie, all kinds of stuff from the Led Zeppelin catalog, and I just loved it. When I was 4, 5, 6 years old, I was wearing a blonde wig, and I was wearing a blonde wig, and I was singing into a turkey baster on the bed, recording videos, wanting to be Robert Plant from Led Zeppelin. And when I was 9, my dad got me my first real guitar, and his dad played a little bit, so you could say the guitar kind of ran in the family, and he wanted me to learn it, and I just loved it, and I took off and ran with it, and was everywhere. I would always have my guitar with me and just played it all the time. I couldn't sing.
And how old were you?
I was 9 years old when that happened.
Wow.
And I couldn't sing at all. And I always thought I would be the guitar player in the band, never the singer, because I could not sing. It was like nails on a chalkboard. So when I was about 12 years old, all of a sudden I find this guy named Elvis Presley. And it's not like I didn't know who Elvis was, because, everybody knows who Elvis was. I remember one time there was a foreign exchange student who moved into our neighborhood from China, and he'd never heard of Elvis Presley. And I was in shock, because who hasn't heard of Elvis? But
it's almost like you got to be in a communist country to not hear of Elvis.
Know of Elvis, yeah. But, yeah. Well, that's a whole other story.
But that's also how old was that person?
He was like 14, 15.
Yeah, so, that's... I could see somebody young in a communist country, but I would actually think that probably anybody over about 30, even in China, for the most part.
Hopefully would know.
Yeah, unless they've grew up in like a rural village somewhere,
Yeah.
I would think if you're living in Beijing. I mean, I was in Beijing, actually, in 2013. My brother and I were walking on the street one day. It was not a statue of Elvis, but it was a statue of Michael Jackson, who for a minute was halfway related to Elvis because he was married to Lisa Marie. But they obviously knew who Michael Jackson was in China.
Uh-huh.
So I'm imagining
probably in the bigger cities, it's probably a little bit better with understanding Western culture. But this kid had no idea. He looked at me like I had 3 eyes when I told him, and I started showing him all these pictures around my room of Elvis and this Elvis song, and I was like, "You've never heard of this guy?"
So you've been that big of an Elvis fan since you were like 12, 14?
Yeah, 12, 13 years old. I got really, really into it. And naturally...
What first sparked the interest in Elvis other than just you liked playing guitar?
Well, I was a huge fan of the show Full House, which starred John Stamos, huge Elvis fan.
Oh, yeah.
When he was cast as the character of Uncle Adam at the time, he talked to Jeff Franklin, the producer, and he said, "This guy, we want to make him like, kind of like an Elvis fan, and he's really into all that." Elvis's twin brother, who is stillborn, his name was Jesse. Uncle Jesse sounds like a much better name for the character, and they changed the character and really made Elvis a huge part of who this character was. And I was watching that show throughout my entire life, so I always knew who Elvis was. but I'd never actually sat down and listened to it.
So Matt, you're 19, so you were not even alive when Full House was first on the air.
I wasn't.
I'm thinking to myself, how did he watch Full House? So you obviously watched some reruns. I actually, in the show, Uncle Jesse, was he an Elvis fan?
He was.
I don't even remember that.
Yeah, he was a huge Elvis fan. There was an episode where he was hard up for some money, and he took a job as an Elvis impersonator to make ends meet. And it was actually the episode on his wedding episode. The song that he chose for his wedding song was Jailhouse Rock. So he sang Jailhouse Rock, and the song was just playing in my head, Uncle Jesse's version, and I went and I looked up the original, and I was just completely blown away watching Elvis slide across tables and all that stuff. I thought it was the coolest thing in the world, and I wanted to do it. That night, I went home and I grabbed my leather jacket out of my closet and just started dancing around. And like I said, I couldn't sing at all, so that kind of came later. I had to learn how to be Elvis after already loving Elvis.
So when did you learn to sing? How did you learn to sing?
So when I was 13 or 14 years old starting out, like I said, I couldn't sing at all, so my parents tried to get me some voice lessons, which didn't help. It was still exactly the same until I was about 15, and I don't know, something just clicked, and it might have been puberty, it might have been my voice dropping to the point where I found out I could sing these notes, but all of a sudden I just was able to find some of that. I don't want to say frogginess because Elvis's voice wasn't froggy, but when I first tried doing the Elvis voice and actually learning it, it was a little bit froggy. And as time's gone on, the frogginess is left, but the intonation has still been Elvis.
Yeah, well, you know, if you have the opportunity to listen to Matt today, I mean, I'm telling you, you sound. I mean, it's almost hard to believe this young 19-year-old young man here can like really produce some of those notes. That sounds very close to Elvis. I mean, it's pretty darn good.
Yeah, I mean, my vocal register is so much deeper than my speaking voice. So people always look at me and they're like, "How did that big voice come out of your little diaphragm?"
One thing I noticed when I was first, watching you perform at the Islander was your singing voice is so much like Elvis.
Thank you.
But then when you dive right back into being Matt Stone in between songs. And you've got this other like young 19-year-old like voice, it's kind of funny, and so it's almost it's funny. I think I was telling Ben like he should maybe just stick to Elvis while he's on stage. Like,
yeah, usually I do. Usually I when I'm on a stage that's more of a theater, I consider myself to be more of an actor, and what I love so much about my show is I'm not just being an Elvis character, and I'm not just there to be the Elvis guy. I'm there to recreate who Elvis actually was in this particular time period that I'm portraying. So you have to get into the mindset of who Elvis was. And say you're doing a show from 1970, you're 1970 Elvis. So at the Islander, it's a little bit more casual, a little bit more laid back. It's just, me singing songs that I want to sing, usually within a niche era, but it's still more casual. When I'm in a theater doing my show, which is called the Elvis Presley Experience, by the way, make sure you go look that up. I'm more of an actor in the sense that I portray the character.
Yeah, so my mother and I went and saw you in Stewart. What is the name of the theater? The
Act Studio Theater.
Act Studio Theater in Stewart. It was great. We saw your G.I. Blues performance, which is themed off of one of Elvis's earlier movies, G.I. Blues. Which is fantastic. It's all about a military experience, and he's playing a character, but he also just got back from being in the military, so it's a great. So you're in uniform, you do it, but it's funny because at one point I can't remember. So you the whole first half of the show, which is like a little over an hour, it's all GI Blues songs,
right? And
then you did an intermission, and then I think you played a bunch of other Elvis songs maybe from that era,
right? So what I did in that show was I started the show out by doing Elvis as Tulsa McLean, his character in G.I. Blues. No relation to McLean from Die Hard, John McLean. But so I was Tulsa McLean, and Elvis, when he first got out of the Army, he had lost a little bit of his Southern accent. He was really self-conscious about his Southern drawl, and he was trying to talk a little bit more like a Northerner. So it's
interesting.
So Florida, in the Palm Beach area, is definitely not deep south. So I have to be a northerner trying to sound like a southerner trying to sound like a northerner.
Yeah.
And so he's talking in the movie, and he's got a little bit of a southern drawl, but at the same time, he's trying to lose it. And so you have to play the character the same way that Elvis played the character. But then when you go back to being Elvis for the second half, where I'm doing Elvis's recording sessions fresh out of the Army, you're back to being Elvis at the time.
But what's interesting is you're talking to the crowd in the theater as Elvis.
Right.
And at one point you said something like, "Oh, I've got a show coming up at the Fountain." I don't know. You said in Miami Beach, which I know it was at the Fountain Blue because I've seen pictures there. And you said with Frank Sinatra and somebody else. I forget.
Sammy Davis was there.
Yeah.
His daughter Nancy was there too. A lot of the Rat Pack was.
So as I'm driving home with my mom later, she goes, "Is he doing a show down in Miami now? Is that what he was saying?" And I said, "No, Mom, that was Matt being Elvis. Elvis was going to go down to Miami." And I said, actually, I pulled up on my phone because just this January I was at the Fountain Blue. It's actually where I recorded an interview with James O'Keefe.
Really?
In January. And as Project Veritas was doing, I think we did that as episode 111, but Project Veritas was doing a whole event down there at the Fountain Blue. Mm-hmm. And as I was walking in the lobby, there were pictures of Elvis, and I took them. They're on my phone. I'll show them to you after the interview. But I showed them to my mom on the way home. I said, actually, this is what he was talking about. This is where Elvis went.
Right.
He went to the Fountain Blue.
Fresh out of the Army, Elvis, he does his first recording sessions like a week after he gets back, records a ton of songs, a lot of, multiple of them turning out to be number one hits. It's Now or Never, Are You Lonesome Tonight, Stuck on You. And he goes down to Miami. Frank asks him to wear a tuxedo, and this time, have you seen the new Elvis movie?
Yeah, Elvis, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
the new movie with Austin Butler.
Yeah. So when Elvis went on the Steve Allen show and they tried to put him in a tux and tails in 1956, it was being the new Elvis, and it was really just a joke. They were trying to make fun of him and put him into a tailcoat and make him sing to a hound dog, and Elvis absolutely hated that performance. By this point, he gets back, and the Army had cleaned up his image so much, not that he had even changed, but being seen as the all-American boy coming back.
Right.
Frank asked him to wear a tuxedo, and he's like, sure. So he went down to a tuxedo shop in Miami, got fitted for a tux, and went on the show at the Fountain Blue.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Well, we're going to get into some other things on this in a few, but I want to go back to Matt Stone. Matt grew up in South Florida here, Palm Beach County, where we're at. And Matt, tell me, today so many young people are being told they need to go to college.
Right.
And you're 19, you're college age, but you're not in college. Tell us a little bit about what your educational path was like growing up, public, private schools, homeschool. I don't know what you did. And then I think you did some dual enrollment. Tell me a little bit about that.
So I was always in public school. I hated every second of it. If you can get your kids out of public school and put them in private school, charter school, I don't care what it is, just get them out of public schools. The entire system is such a disaster today, especially today. I mean, I got lucky. I'm so afraid for the stuff that they were pushing on my sister, and she actually was just taken out and put in private school. So congratulations to my parents.
How old's your sister?
Much. She is 13.
Okay. Is that your only sibling?
I have an older sister, too, who's also married, and she's a military wife, and she lives in South Carolina. But when I was going into my...
Yeah, so what'd you do? You didn't go to college, your educational path?
When I was in my junior year, I just hated public school so much that I kept begging my mom to make me a homeschool student, because... during my sophomore year, I think out of my entire schedule of like 8 classes, 2 of them were actual classes, because I was working ahead so much and taking classes online, so I didn't have to take them in school, that my entire day was just a waste. It was a joke, because I was working so much outside of school to finish early that they made me sit in class for things like student aid, or... I took a piano class when I already knew how to play piano, so they're teaching us Mary Had a Little Lamb, and I just go... and be done for the rest of the 2 hours because there was nothing else for me to take. So after a while, it just got to the point where my mom kind of understood where I was coming from, that I'm doing all the classes online. I might as well just finish it online. And I was also missing school to go to shows. She let me be homeschooled during my junior year. Also, I went to Elvis Week, which just happens to fall on the first week of school in Florida. So it was actually during Elvis Week, I missed the entire first week of school. And on that weekend, she was like, yeah, we're just going to let you be homeschooled right before I was supposed to go back to school, which I was dreading every second of.
Part of were you still in high school when COVID started? Or did you?
I was already homeschooled.
Yeah. Oh, you were in homeschool by that point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people were forced to be homeschooled at that point.
Yeah. That would have been my. I was ahead of the curve.
But they weren't really. I should clarify that people weren't really homeschooled.
Right.
They were in public school at home.
At home.
Yeah.
Which was such a horror story for so many parents once they actually saw what the heck was going on with their kids' education. I think COVID probably caused more kids to be taken out of public education and put into private education than anything else.
It did.
It really was a blessing in disguise to, even though it probably ruined so many lives and social skills and all that by putting these kids into school at home. If the parents actually thought, wow, this is not working, and put their kids in private school, I think it was really worth it. But
so you graduate.
Yeah, so I graduate early. I think I finished my last class on the summer going into senior year. So I couldn't graduate a year early because I hadn't finished by June. So I finished it online in like August. So just dual enrolled for my senior year because the state of Florida, or the taxpayers in Florida, will pay for your education, your college education at a community college while you're in your senior year. So all the classes were free. I went in and I took business marketing, and it was advertising school at Palm Beach State College. And I swear, in my English composition class, my teacher told us that we have to capitalize the letter I when using it as a standalone word. So it's like, I went to the beach. Mm-hmm. She had to tell the class to capitalize the letter I. And I was just so blown away by that. And I told my mom, okay, I'm going to get my associate's degree. I'm going to finish early. And after that year, I just thought, oh my goodness.
So that was in a college class?
Yes, that was in a college class.
That's
College English Composition 1. The entire school was such a complete joke. And I don't know if it was just because it was community college, but I don't have anything against community college. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'd probably be hearing the same thing if I went to Harvard and paying $60,000 a year to get it. But so I just decided, okay, I'm 18. I can't do this anymore. I was 17. I can't do this anymore. And at 17, this is a fun story. So I met my now wife, and we were just talking and whatnot. And I decided, okay, I need to, get my act together. I need to learn to start, making money. I can't just be a college student for forever. And I was already out of college at the time. I had already decided that I was going to leave, but I didn't know what I was going to do. And I decided, doing Elvis exclusively is a little bit unstable, especially with what happened in 2020.
Yeah.
All of my friends who relied on this for a living were completely out of work.
Yeah.
So I went and I applied, and I got a job that I wasn't qualified for, really, which I think is another one of the greatest pieces of advice in the world. Apply for jobs you're not qualified for, because there's no better way to learn than being in that job. I was hired as a part-time, like a fellowship, like a paid internship. Within a month, I was a full-time employee, like one of the top on the staff.
That's great.
Yeah. So just putting yourself out there and dipping your toes in the water, or not even dipping your toes in, just jumping into the water, whether you're qualified for it or not, you will learn skills that you will never learn in college by actually.
So how did you come across a job like that? There might be some people that might try to apply for a job like that, not qualified, don't get the job, maybe become frustrated, this person won't hire me. There might also be jobs that you don't think you're qualified for, but how did you find this opportunity?
Well, a friend of mine actually worked at a competing organization, another company, and you actually know the CEO, Derek, who...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. He worked over at Extrats, and he was yeah, man, you got to get a job at Extrats. It's such a cool company. And then he told me about this competing company, and he told me all about this company and said, hey, man, you got to go in and just, apply until, Derek's ready to hire you. So I actually applied, and I didn't get the job. I never heard back. About a week later, I applied for an internship with Morgan Zeggers, who would actually be really
I know
good.
Morgan.
Yeah, you know Morgan?
Yeah.
I was her intern for a while, and I was making content.
All right, Morgan, this means you have to blow this podcast up.
Exactly,
all right? Okay.
yeah.
We're gonna do a little message for Morgan.
Yeah. So, yeah, Morgan's a great girl. And ironically, I got to work with her again after I ended my internship. But, so I did an internship with her for like a month, maybe 2 months, just making content for the Yas page. And I decided to apply again. And that time I got the job. So doing an internship for 3-4 weeks meant the difference in the related field meant the difference between not getting the job and getting the job.
You know, one thing too, one piece of advice I like to give people, it's not always easy or even a lot of people can't do internship. Was it a paid internship or was it not paid?
That one was not paid.
Yeah. So, you know, it's funny. I feel like when I was younger, I would probably tell somebody, oh, I would never take an unpaid internship. Mm-hmm. But then I worked at the James Madison Institute for 9 years, a free market think tank here in Florida. I had a lot of interns. And the thing is, there were some of them we ended up hiring. Most we didn't because we just didn't have that capacity. But others, we had great recommendations for them. We were able to, they gained skills at our organization, and then they were able to go on to somewhere else with that experience. And or even if that experience could have been somewhere else in the think tank movement, or it could have been just somewhere else in Tallahassee, could have been for a state legislator. Going to work for other people helps you build networks and connections and experience. And so there's a lot of great opportunities. And for those that, you know, I would say, so almost all of our interns were actually college students. We were based in Tallahassee, so most of them went to Florida State. Sometimes in the summer we would get an out-of-state college student, but they were they were from Tallahassee locally, so they were back home from like wherever they went off to in another state. And so if you can do that for 3 or 4 months, and even though you're not getting paid, most of those internships are like 10 to 15 hours a week. It's not a lot, but you're gaining so much experience and meeting so many people. And we would take our interns to a lot of cool events too, where they would be in rooms that they wouldn't normally get to be in if otherwise not interning there.
Exactly. I mean, if doing an internship for 3 weeks and just creating 3 pieces of content a week for this page meant the difference between getting a job that now pays me very well and not getting a job, I mean, do it.
Yeah.
I mean, you're gonna pay to go to college to learn, but you're not gonna do a free internship.
Yeah.
Right. So you're gonna pay $40,000 a year to have something nice to put on a resume, but you're not gonna do an internship for free that costs you nothing. Just because you're not getting paid, but you're throwing away so much money to go get another thing.
Yeah, no, that's such a good point you make, is how much money we spend on college, but are not willing to just...
But you won't do a job for free for a couple weeks or a couple months.
Yeah, my friend Zach Slayback has a great series of books he's written, and that he's a real big... he's a featured innovator in the Fearless Journeys community now as well. He's been on this podcast twice now, but he is a really big advocate of... he says, I love... the idea of free work. He's done it. He's had people do it for him because it's a testing ground. It also tells you what you might like and what you might not like, right?
Exactly.
You get to put your feet in the water, like you said.
Yeah. I mean, the way that it worked when I was hired, I was running the monetization side of things and working more with Facebook and learning how to make money off of these YouTube videos for our clients that have, you know, big Facebook pages and make these videos for Facebook. And that was my job, was to come up with content for these people to put on Facebook to get Facebook money. And, just like title the little selfie videos that they send in to get Facebook money. And after a while, the other side of the company that deals with more campaign stuff, like tweet writing and graphic making and the more creative side of getting people elected, they asked me if I wanted to, just try out writing a couple tweets. And all of a sudden, I was on that side of the company, and I was no longer fellowship intern.
And a lot of those types of skills that you were just doing, you could be doing them for another side of the company, but those things are very applicable beyond, to other companies too. So you make yourself a more marketable candidate down the road.
Exactly. Yeah.
And not to mention what you're doing with the Elvis stuff. I know you've got a Facebook and YouTube and all that.
Yeah. All the skills that I have learned running social media for politicians, I have applied to running my own Facebook page and running my own YouTube page and learning to get monetized on those platforms as well. So I'm not only making money from shows, I'm making money from the other side of just content creation within the Elvis world. So I think that I exploit a lot of the things that a lot of other Elvises can't do because they don't have the knowledge to do them. So I've taken so much of the knowledge that I've learned within the political game just within the past year and a half and applied them to my Elvis stuff.
Yeah, so speaking of your Elvis stuff, so obviously we heard a little bit about how you became interested in Elvis and you grew to I guess learn a lot of his songs and try to get as close to his voice as possible. So what led you to become an Elvis Presley tribute artist, and when did you start doing that?
So when I first started out, and I went to an open mic night with a friend of mine. So there was this, I was 13 years old, and I already knew who Elvis was, and I was already listening to his music, and I was already a fan. But honestly, when I first found Elvis, I was listening to like 3 songs on repeat, and Elvis had 1,000 songs.
3 songs?
Like 3 songs.
Yeah, on repeat.
Like nothing else. And if it wasn't like a super fast rock song from 1957, I did not want to hear it. If it was a ballad, even if it was a fast rock song from like 4 years later, I didn't care. And I don't know what it was. I think I was just like in the mindset of, oh, Elvis was terrible after the 50s, which is not true at all. But, you fall within that mindset. And I guess I kind of got bored with it after a while, after, a couple months of listening to the same couple songs. So I asked a friend of mine if he wanted to start a band. And when I say friend of mine, I had never actually met this kid before.
Oh.
I just knew him, and I knew he lived in the area, and I knew that we had some mutual friends, and he played guitar too. So we started this thing, and he had told me about an open mic night that he had gone to a week before, and he asked me to go with him that week. So we sang a couple songs together, and we sang a couple songs separately, and I sang Stairway to Heaven that night by Led Zeppelin.
Wow.
And I can't sing that song anymore, that's for sure. My voice is a little bit too deep to hit those Robert Plant notes. But so I did that night, and I just started going back to that open mic night every single week, just playing for tips. And then I found Suspicious Minds live in 1970 on YouTube, and I just stumbled across it. And from that moment on, when I was, I want to say, almost 14, maybe like late 13-year-old, I don't know. My mind was blown, and I knew this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. Before then, I was, kind of singing some Elvis songs in my show at the open mic night, but it wasn't being Elvis. It was Matt Stone singing Elvis in his own way, and I saw that performance, and I thought, I want to do that. I want to be that guy right there.
You saw which performance?
It was Suspicious Minds, August 11th.
You saw Elvis's performance?
Yes,
okay.
August 11th, 1970, dinner show in Las Vegas, which is ironically the same Suspicious Minds that they recreated for the new movie.
Oh, yeah.
And so I watched that performance, and I was just so blown away. I was about to go to high school, and I thought, okay, I'm going to go to the orchestra in high school, and I'm going to get all these people in the orchestra to play with me, and I'm going to create a whole band out of kids from high school. I never did that, but I was so hooked on this, and I knew I wanted to do it, and I really just had this dream about having this touring theater Elvis show, and I thought it would happen overnight, and obviously it didn't. I mean, that dream has started coming true.
You were 14.
Yeah, that dream has started coming true within the past year. So,
that's awesome.
Yeah,
well,
that's really what happened.
Can you also explain to us the difference between a tribute artist and an impersonator?
Okay, so really, I don't think there's much of a difference. So a lot of people try to say that impersonators think they're Elvis, and tribute artists don't. They're paying tribute to Elvis. It's like somebody who sings at the Super Bowl and sings Purple Rain even though they're not Prince. if that were actually the case, you wouldn't spend $5,000 on a jumpsuit, a wig, jewelry, makeup, everything else. That's being an impersonator. It's not being a tribute artist. There's a huge difference. So I think that the term Elvis tribute artist was created to be a more politically correct way of saying Elvis impersonator, because impersonator has such a bad connotation. And unfortunately, within the Elvis business, 99 out of 100 people who do Elvis are absolutely terrible and give a terrible name to the industry. There are so many terrible, cheesy Elvis acts out there that you just... It's gotten such a bad rep over the years, just like Johnny Carson said, if life were fair, Elvis would be alive and the impersonators would be dead. There are so many that are just so bad. I think the term tribute artist was created to take some of that away and kind of make it more like the professional ones are called tribute artists. So, I mean, it's a nicer way to say it, so I still use it sometimes. But if I were to say anything, I'm not a tribute artist, I would say that I'm more of an actor. And I more portray Elvis on stage. I'm not just, some guy who wants to sing Elvis songs in his own way and happens to spend $5,000 on a wig, hair, makeup. Well, I don't wear a wig, but everybody else does.
Yeah.
Jumpsuit, makeup, rings, all that.
So I mentioned I went and saw your performance up in Stewart on GI Blues. It was a thematic performance. So I got a two-part question here. Can you tell us what inspired you to do that, like as a theme? And then also, secondly, what other kind of thematic shows do you have coming up?
All right, yeah. So I wanted to do GI Blues just because earlier in the year I did Blue Hawaii. So I've always wanted to kind of expand the typical Elvis show that I would do and do something that was a little bit different that wasn't being done. So there are Elvis festivals and whatnot where they have more themed shows at them because it's all like the diehard Elvis fans who come in to see these little niche shows.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, this is so entertaining. People love it. As long as I can find a few hits to put within this theme, I can start doing this at regular theaters and market them as, thematic shows. So I did Blue Hawaii, and I decided there wasn't enough in Blue Hawaii to do. So I added Girls, Girls, Girls to that because it was shot the next year in Hawaii. So I did the songs from those two movies, put them into a performance, and did them at the Act Theater. And like you said earlier, I don't know if you did say this, but you know how I put movie clips to break up the songs?
Yeah, you did that.
Yeah.
I didn't say that, but you put some movie clips on the screen behind you.
So we had a projector behind me.
Yeah.
And between every single song, we would have some kind of clip to set up the song, transitioning it to a different scene in the movie to kind of tell the story.
Yeah, I liked it because it helped tell the story, it helped set the scene.
Right.
Especially for maybe people who either have never seen the movie,
right,
or it's been a long time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that I think that the show there was a little bit too much of the screen and the projection of all that with Blue Hawaii. So I cut it back a little bit with GI Blues, and I realized, okay, there's 12 songs on the GI Blues soundtrack. I can't just do GI Blues because okay, you got Wooden Heart, that's a hit. You got Blue Suede Shoes, which was re-recorded for the soundtrack, that's a hit. But I need more. And I decided that, okay, GI Blues was a movie Elvis did right out of the Army. Let's take the hit recording sessions he did right out of the Army, throw them in there. So I think the point of doing thematic shows is being able to do the fun, different stuff that I like and that the super diehard Elvis fans like, but also make them enjoyable for a regular audience.
Yeah, no, it was great. To be honest with you, so first of all, for those who have not seen one of these, I've only seen the one other than the Islander, and so the GI Blues was really great, and I think that first of all, you do it like you run the whole thing pretty much on your own. I know there was a lighting guy in the back. Mm-hmm. You had somebody in the front that was playing some music on the background with your phone.
This is a fun story.
Yeah.
So usually at the Act Theater.
Just really small.
Yeah.
It's like maybe 40 seats.
40 seats.
40 seats, yeah.
Yeah, it's a tiny place, so we do a lot of shows there because, I mean, you could tell.
You did 4 shows in 3 days there.
Yeah, 4 shows in 3 days. Obviously, I don't only want to do a show and buy all the costumes for only one 40-seat show and take 50% of that, right? So I don't even think I would make a profit after buying the GI Blues outfit and all that. And so we do a lot of shows there, and usually Dennis, the owner of the theater who also runs lights, usually he runs all the sound. and he will hook up his board back there to my system. The first show, we were plagued with sound issues. It was. I'm very grateful you weren't there on Friday night, because there were so many sound issues. It sounded terrible. After a while throughout the night, I was just like, I called a friend of mine on stage who was sitting in the front row, and I was like, okay, just come up here and vamp for a second. I got to figure this out, because I was so embarrassed with what was happening. So next show, my friend John came in, who's from Iowa, and he comes in and he flies in from Iowa to see my shows all the time, which is so cool. But we were trying to set up before the show and get these sound issues that we had the first night figured out. It was 30 minutes of showtime. I had hair not done, not in costume, no makeup, none of this. We were about to start the show, and I just told Dennis in the back, we don't have time to figure this out. I'm just going to use my stuff. John, he was there with me during rehearsal. Can you run the tracks from my phone? And that's what happened. And we threw it together right before the show started. And he was trying to figure out, because he'd never done it
If I wasn't
before.
sitting kind of where I was sitting, I might not have even noticed, but kept seeing you kind of point to him a couple times.
Yeah.
And I was like, that guy's running his sound from the first row.
Yeah, he's sitting right in the front row. And I gave him my phone, and he was scrolling up and down trying to find these songs.
Anyway, considering what you're working with, it's done a phenomenal job. I actually think if somebody could invest in this guy with some just a little bit more of an upgrade, a little bit, an audio guy, a sound, whatever, a lighting,
usually
it
within
would
a
really
bigger
be
theater,
phenomenal.
Thank you. Usually within a bigger theater, I have that kind of stuff, and usually the theater provides it. But unfortunately, within this one show, the in-house equipment just was not compatible with.
So you've done Blue Hawaii and GI Blues. I think you got like a Christmas and an Easter. What's coming up?
I have a Christmas show coming up, and I have an Easter show coming up.
Both in Stewart at the Act Theater.
Right. So with the Christmas show, that one I haven't really decided what I'm going to do yet, because I was thinking just running down all of Elvis's Christmas songs, but I also do want to throw in some of the regular Elvis show as well. So this is something that I've been tossing around in my head. So as you've seen Elvis, the new film, there's that whole thing in the end where with the song If I Can Dream, they're running around and it's the Christmas special and the Colonel's telling them to do a Christmas song. I was thinking about doing a whole show, regular Elvis show, and throwing in Christmas songs and running down the Christmas catalog. And it being, a longer format show. So I'm able to hit everything. GI Blues was also pretty long. And then in the end, coming out in the white If I Can Dream suit. Yeah. Everybody's expecting If I Can Dream. In the movie, it was Here Comes Santa Claus that Colonel was trying to make him sing. In reality, it was I'll Be Home for Christmas, which is a much more tasteful choice, obviously, to close a Christmas special with. I was thinking, do I'll Be Home for Christmas, and then If I Can Dream to make it,
well, that's one of my favorite Elvis songs, If I Can Dream. So it's great. So before we geek out a little bit more on Elvis, how can people find you, Matt Stone?
Well, go on my Facebook page, Matt Stone is Elvis. My YouTube channel is also Matt Stone is Elvis, and on Instagram it's @RealMattStone.
Okay, so Matt Stone is Elvis on Facebook
and YouTube. Yeah, and then it's @RealMattStone.
@RealMattStone on Instagram. So I'll put some of those links in the show notes, so wherever people are listening or watching, hopefully they can click on that as well. Okay, so we're going to geek out a little more on Elvis. So how many times have you been to Graceland?
I've honestly lost count. I think we're at about 10 times now. 8, 9, 10 times.
What was the first time?
The first time I went in 2017, I believe. Oh, no, 2016, because I don't know when the last time you've been.
I've only been once, and it was in 2018.
Okay, so you know how they have the whole mall thing across the street, Elvis Presley's Memphis? So that was a pretty new complex when you went.
Yeah.
That was built in 2017 as a major upgrade from what they had before. Before it was kind of just these rinky-dink shops with a little car museum and just much, much less stuff that was on display. All the jumpsuits were actually in the racquetball court back then. They'd have the they have the gold records lining the walls, and 4 or 5 jumpsuits maybe displayed within the racquetball court.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I went once before they had finished the new exhibit, and I thought it was the greatest place on earth. I thought it was amazing. I heard about this new hotel, the guest house they were building, and that they were upgrading it all and building the Elvis Presley's Memphis. I had to go the next year. I went twice that year.
So they've got a hotel that they own?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The guest house?
The guest house at Graceland. It's right next door. And So I heard about it and had to go. Convince my dad to take
How
me.
large is this hotel?
It's pretty big. It's a pretty big place.
Okay.
I'd say maybe a little bit smaller than the Breakers is.
Oh, well, that's pretty big. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. It's pretty big place. It's like Graceland on steroids. It's
And it's just like a lot of
colonial.
Elvis stuff everywhere.
Yeah, it's meant to look colonial, like Graceland. It's meant to look like a colonial style mansion, and they did it in a tasteful way where it's not kind of like the Heartbreak Hotel was, where it was kind of cheesy design, which they actually demolished to build the guest house. But like the designs of the rooms are inspired by different rooms at Graceland, and there's pictures on the walls of jumpsuits and of TCB necklaces, but it's not actual pictures of Elvis, which some fans find kind of weird. Like it's taking the focus off of Elvis, and I've seen a lot of complaints about that marketing direction, but I think it's kind of cool because I think it's done in a more tasteful way to make this look more like a 5-star hotel and not like the Heartbreak Hotel.
Well, it's funny. I always wanted to go to Graceland. I always wanted to go to Memphis. That was my first time to Memphis. And my really only association with Memphis, for the most part, was Graceland. I was like, every time anybody brought up Memphis, I was always just think Graceland. I would love to go. So I finally got to go in 2018. It was amazing. I was actually there in Memphis for about 4 or 5 days with a group of friends, and we went there specifically to pay tribute to the 50th anniversary of Martin Luther King's assassination, which took...
I was there too.
You were there then?
I was there during
that's
that
cool.
week, yeah.
That's cool. So we were there at the same time. Yeah. So anyway, at the end of the trip, either some of my friends who had come for that purpose either didn't want to go to Graceland or they had already been on a previous trip. So me and my friend Ruth went to Graceland together on our last day, and it was really special. And I got to say, one of the things that really struck me the most, on top of all the cool stuff you mentioned, all the memorabilia, just seeing everything. This is Elvis's house. I'm here. When you go on the tour in the house and you got the little audio thing and you're going through and then you go back to the barn, and when you come back in the house and you're kind of going through almost like, I guess it's like the basement in a sense, and you come in there and when you walk in, I'm assuming it's still in the same place as it was 4 years ago, on the left side of the wall, there's first of all, there's a picture of maybe the first picture of Elvis with his family, with him and his parents.
You're talking about the trophy building. I know
yeah,
exactly
is that the trophy? It's downstairs. It's the house that's downstairs.
Oh no.
It's the lowest level of the house.
So in the basement there is the TV room and the pool room, I believe would be. Yes, the TV room and pool room are down there.
Maybe that's so. But as you're coming in, anyway, there's this picture of Elvis and his parents when he's like a little kid and must be taken in Tupelo or something. It's like the very famous picture. But right next to it, there is Elvis's father's IRS statement. I wrote this down.
Right, that is the trophy building. That's you come outside, and that's actually
that's the trophy building.
The house,
Okay, so you see Vernon Presley's IRS statement for the year 1943. Okay, this Elvis was born in 1935, right? 35.
Yeah, 35.
Yeah, and so he was just 8 years old at the time. Vernon Presley made a total of $352.50 for the year.
It's pretty incredible.
And by the way, there were still like $13 of taxes taken out. Like
that tells you something.
Yeah, and so it was like, my mouth about dropped, and I'm thinking to myself, that was 1943, and if you think about it, 14 years later, 1957, when Elvis was 22. The Presleys purchased Graceland for $102,500, which seems like a bargain today.
Yeah.
Also, the house itself, there are much nicer houses right behind us on Palm Beach Island. So some people go and they're kind of like in the year 2022, they might be let down a little bit.
Right?
This isn't so great. Why do people care about
Rooms
this?
were separated. They weren't these big grand spaces. Ceilings were low. It was
and by the way, it's good to remember that when they bought that. First of all, $102,000 in like 1957 would be like probably at least
about
several
$1 million
right?
today.
Yeah,
it's
and so also they had 13.8 acres of land at the time with the house and the barn on it and everything. But anyway, I was just thinking to myself like, wow, like how quickly they rose because of this young man's talent and his ability, his persona. He also came to be in a world where television was just starting. So I always like to say Elvis was really the first truly worldwide celebrity that people could see on television.
I agree, yeah.
Right? Like there might have been bigger celebrities in history at different moments, but like for somebody to see on television, and they were doing an art. They weren't like a king. Right. Well, he was the king, but I mean, they weren't like a president or something like that. It wasn't like George Washington. Like, okay, maybe people knew about George Washington.
Like
but they
when
didn't see
Elvis was in Germany, when he was doing his discharge from the army and he was leaving Germany, more reporters were at that press conference than they were when Eisenhower went to Germany the same year.
That's amazing. At the same time, same year. So you've been there 9-10 times, whatever you. Have you ever met Priscilla?
I have never met Priscilla. I have not had the pleasure yet. Hopefully one day I do. There was Elvis Week, not this year, last year. I was at this little bar there, this little dive bar called Hernando's Hideaway, because a friend of mine was doing a show there, and the next day, Priscilla went into the bar and just stopped in.
Oh, wow.
That was so disappointing.
Well, I'm not going to say this on the air, but after I left Memphis, I heard a little tip about where Priscilla tends to go on a weekly basis. So I'll give you that tip, and maybe
really?
you can find out if it's true. I don't know. It's pre-COVID. So have you ever met Lisa Murray?
I've never met Lisa. The people that I have met within the Elvis world, I had a podcast a little while ago with a friend of mine called From Tupelo to Heaven, and I interviewed Elvis's stepbrother on that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that was very cool. I've talked to Larry Geller, who was his spiritual advisor and hairstylist and all that, many times on the phone.
And these people are getting up there now.
Yeah, never met George Klein. DJ Fontana, I have a signed picture from, and I talked to him by email when I got the picture, but I never actually got to meet him before he passed. I met James Burton, his guitar player, at Marlowe's in Memphis last year, this barbecue restaurant. Yeah, I've met some pretty cool people, but never any.
Now, Graceland, I know they have some different festivals there and things like that. And they have a stage there now, right?
Right.
Have you ever performed at Graceland?
I was there in August. So
Elvis Week.
Right. So most of the time that stage is dedicated for other artists to play on, and it's more like a tour stop for larger.
Yeah, I just saw Collective Soul in concert again, and they mentioned from the stage that they had performed at Graceland.
Yeah.
Now they also mentioned that they recorded an album, their most recent album, at Graceland, and they were the first people to ever do so since Elvis. Yeah. Is that true?
I believe that is true. I know that Lisa Marie has done like photo shoots in there and music videos in there, but I don't think she's ever actually recorded in the room.
So I haven't really looked that up, but that's pretty incredible. Right. But anyway, you have also performed there at Graceland.
Right. So every year at Graceland during Elvis Week, they have what is called the Ultimate Elvis Tribute Artist Contest, which is like the best of the best Elvis tribute artists who compete in festivals all across the world, and the winners of those festivals that are sanctioned by Elvis Presley Enterprises go on to compete in the semifinals and then the finals in Memphis.
Wow.
So I was there because I won the Orlando Festival, the only festival in Florida.
Is that the Mount Dora? Or is that different?
No, it's the Orlando Elvis Festival, a little bit different.
Okay.
It actually used to be in Mount Dora, though. So I won that one in July 31st, the week before Elvis Week.
Wow.
Flew up. Did the contest. I was in finals my first year. So
congratulations. Well, we'll have you win it one year, and hopefully. Then you've been to Tupelo?
I have. I went to Tupelo for the first time last year, and I was there this year as well.
Well, I'm gonna have to head to Tupelo with you sometime. I've never been. My one of my good friends who's been on this podcast, Bob Rubin. I'm not going to say he's an Elvis fan. His wife is an Elvis fan, and I think his mother-in-law is an Elvis fan. But they were driving back from Colorado on a trip, and he just told me like a week ago that they stopped in Tupelo, and his wife was just having I guess convulsions or something. But no,
cathartic moment.
He showed me pictures of Elvis's home, and I guess they moved it a few hundred yards or something from where it was. But that's pretty cool. I love to go to the birthplace. So what did you think about the most recent Elvis movie? What are your kind of original
I've mentioned
thoughts?
it like 5 times, so I think it's safe to say I liked it.
Yeah, you liked it.
Yeah, it was a fantastic film. I was really worried when I heard that they were making an Elvis film because there have been so many terrible ones over the years. There are so many like made-for-TV Elvis biopics that never do justice, except for the only one that I thought was good was this one that starred Jonathan Rhys Meyers and Randy Quaid. Randy Quaid played the Colonel. And I used to think that was the greatest Elvis movie ever made. It was made in 2005. And after seeing the new one, I kind of looked down on it because it's not so great anymore. But I was really worried about it because I was worried that they would take the same creative licenses that they took with Bohemian Rhapsody and all those films. And there are some stories that need a little bit of creative license to make them great. And I thought Elvis's is not one of those stories. It's one of those stories that's already great the way it is, and there's no reason to just make things up. And, of course, they took creative licenses with the movie, but they did so in a way that didn't necessarily bother me.
Right, I agree.
Interesting.
It was really interesting. Like, I'm thinking of kind of early in the movie when they're talking about the Colonel discovering Elvis, but the Colonel had come from this, like, carnival circus background, and so they got this sort of fantastic images of the Colonel, like, as this ringleader of a circus, and almost like he has now found his greatest, I don't know, circus act, Elvis.
Exactly.
And you kind of pause a little bit, knowing like, well, Elvis isn't a circus act, right?
Right.
But at the same time, you take that kind of, I didn't mind that creative license they took with that, because in a sense, he was a great talent, but he became perhaps the biggest brand. Yeah, the greatest show on earth, the biggest brand. And so it was kind of a cool way they did that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like the few things with like dates, moving dates around, and really what all they did was they simplified the story rather than just making things up. They simplified it.
Yeah.
The only thing that happened in the movie that I think was just like brazenly, completely made up was Elvis firing the Colonel on stage. But in reality, it was right after Elvis was behaving kind of strangely on stage. Colonel went backstage mad at Elvis after the show, and they had that exact same argument in his suite. So it wasn't like it was completely made up. They just moved the setting of it to make it more dramatic. So it was really just making things more dramatic and combining different moments that didn't actually happen, or combining moments that did happen, putting them together into one moment to make them have a bigger impact.
And what did you think of Austin Butler's role as Elvis?
I thought Austin did such an amazing job. There are very few actors, or really, he's the only actor who I've ever felt like I'm watching Elvis.
Yeah, I had the same feeling. I mean, I watched it on the big screen, and was thinking, I feel like I looked up at the screen a few times, like, is that Austin Butler, or is that or is that like some old image of Elvis they just drawn out? Because it just looked too good.
The scene that shocked me more than anything is the scene where Priscilla is leaving him. Or sorry, spoiler, but it's a biopic. So if you know the Elvis story, you'll know what's happening. Priscilla's leaving him, and she's throwing the pill bottles at him and all that. And he gets up and he stumbles down the stairs. And when he's sitting on the stairs crying after she leaves, because Austin wore a lot of prosthetics for the movie. He had a fake jawline, fake chin, fake cheekbones, fake lips. And they aged him really well, and they did it so naturally too. There's that moment where he's sitting on the stairs and he's so pale and he's crying and his hair is all messed up and he's sitting there, and I just thought I really felt like I was watching Elvis in that moment. Yeah. And it's interesting because with all the other moments where Elvis is on stage, you've seen Elvis in those moments. You've seen the videos of that. That's a moment we've never seen video of Elvis crying when Priscilla leaves him before.
Yeah.
Yet you still think that it's him.
I also wonder who they consulted. Like, I wonder if she was consulted in any ways for things like that.
Elvis and Me, Priscilla's book, has a bit of infactual information that she sprinkled into the book right after Elvis died, before she realized how much money she could make by protecting his image.
Interesting.
So, I mean, Priscilla has made millions and millions of dollars, and I don't dislike Priscilla at all. There are a lot of people who think, oh my goodness, she left him, she cheated on him, she divorced him. Why does she deserve to have all this money made off of his estate? In reality, when Elvis died, they were about to lose Graceland. Elvis Presley Enterprises was about to go bankrupt, and Elvis's dad could not pay the property taxes on Graceland anymore because Elvis was such a big spender. And Priscilla came in and she thought, oh my gosh, let's turn this into a tourist attraction. Let's brand Elvis's image. She was the first one ever to copyright somebody's likeness. I mean, she was just a brilliant...
Priscilla was.
Yeah.
Wow.
She was a brilliant businesswoman. Before then, everybody was making these cheap Elvis T-shirts.
It's too bad maybe she couldn't be taking over the job of Colonel Parker before Elvis passed.
Yeah. She was just a brilliant businesswoman, and she came in.
Speaking of Priscilla, I assume you've seen, I think we've talked about this, you've seen the HBO, I think it was HBO, that
The Searcher?
The Searcher, Elvis Presley, The Searcher, 2019, I think. So she's one of the narrators, as is Tom Petty and Bruce Springsteen and some others. So if anybody hasn't seen it, I think go find it. It's either on HBO or something
Max,
else.
yeah.
It's HBO Max, 2-part series. It's about an hour and a half each part. I would actually venture to say it might be better than seeing the Elvis movie. It's more of a documentary, though.
Yeah, it's a good documentary. The one thing that I don't like about The Searcher, and I feel this way about a lot of projects that Priscilla's involved with, and once again, not knocking Priscilla, she's a wonderful businesswoman and she's done amazing things for the estate, but unfortunately Priscilla likes to act like Elvis died after she left, which I think is really sad. Elvis had an amazing career after they were divorced. He was still happy after.
So I see what you're saying. So like that basically.
She acts like it's the last nail in the coffin.
It's the last thing. Yeah, and he had a resurgence after that for a little bit.
Yeah. He had the Aloha from Hawaii special. He was very, very happy with Linda Thompson. She was his girlfriend for 4.5 years, and that's really like my only complaint about the movie Elvis is that she had no role in it, when I think she really should have, because I think she's the only girlfriend who deserved to have a role in that movie other than Priscilla.
So, a couple controversial things, and we don't have to go deep into it, but so first of all, speaking of Elvis died, he had. Let's talk about his death, because maybe you know a little bit more about this than I do. I don't want to put any words in anybody's mouth. What we kind of know is he died of some kind of overdose. Now it's funny when people hear this today, like younger people, they think Elvis was, and you can tell me your viewpoint. When they say, I had a friend recently say, oh, he was a big party guy. He did a lot of drugs, all these sorts of things. Yeah. I've heard other people say he had a lot of women. That may be true. I don't know. And somebody recently told me, oh, I heard he had a lot of underage women, which I was like, whoa. Okay, now we're jumping to lots of conclusions. But I had to correct someone recently. I said, actually what was interesting is I learned this when I was at Graceland. It just didn't even, first of all, I never really believed Elvis was a drug addict. Like when we think of a drug addict like a rock and roll star, we think of people doing like cocaine and ecstasy and heroin and all these sorts of crazy drugs that to get high. He got addicted to basically prescription drugs.
Exactly.
Uppers and downers. He had this crazy schedule. You could blame the Colonel if you want, whatever, but he clearly, he was worked to death in some ways. And so that's part of it. But when I was at Graceland, I was on the Lisa Marie plane. It's named after his daughter. And we were in the middle, and there's somebody there that worked at Graceland that was just, there to answer questions. And there was this little bar in the middle of the plane. It looked like a little bar or something, and there was all these little dispensers. And I asked them, I said, what are these little dispensers? And they said, oh, these are actually Priscilla had these put on the plane. These were soda dispensers. I said, soda dispensers? They said, yeah, he didn't like alcohol, so he would drink soda. And Priscilla had these like little soda made for him or something to put there. And I said, he didn't drink alcohol? What do you mean, like never? And they're like, yeah, pretty much never. Like, yeah, he's probably had a few beers in his life, but he didn't like it. So he's not somebody who like got drunk and liked alcohol.
Exactly, yeah. Elvis, if you call singing gospel music until 6 a.m. with your backing group all night partying, then sure, yeah. He was a wild party animal singing Take My Hand, Precious Lord all night long. But, I mean, he would go up after his show and he would sing gospel music all night long. That was his way of partying. He was not one for these huge parties with drugs and all that. He didn't do that. He didn't drink. He very, very, very rarely would ever have a drink because he didn't like the taste of alcohol. And then on top of that, all the drugs that he did were all prescribed to him from a doctor who he was honestly convinced that he needed them.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, he was overprescribed. And there's this very interesting story about this one doctor who was in Memphis, who used to have this big jar, this huge jar of pills on his desk at work, and it was just this huge array of random pills, and Elvis could go in there when he would go into the office, and he would be able to name every single pill that was in that jar without any labels or anything, just by the color and the shape. So Elvis knew his prescription drugs. He thought it was medicine, and the doctor would prescribe this thing and this thing and this thing. And there's a very interesting story in David Stanley's book. David Stanley was Elvis's stepbrother, and his other stepbrother, Billy, and Ricky, who's another one. Billy actually just wrote another book called Elvis's Faith, or something along the lines of Elvis's Faith. Oh. And that he just was on Fox News the other day. He had a quote graphic of him put on Fox News' Instagram page, which, I mean, it's so cool because, I mean, I interviewed this guy last year.
That's awesome.
But there's this one story that David Stanley told. So David, his stepbrother, his younger stepbrother, was always getting in trouble. I mean, this guy was a rock and roll party animal in the 70s. Elvis was bailing him out of every kind of trouble in the world. He was like a real piece of work. And it was always like very, sweep this under the rug, don't let this get in the papers, and really just ignored by everybody. But he was part of the entourage, and one day he came into Elvis's bedroom, and he was sniffling. And Elvis was like, what's going on? He goes, oh, my sinuses are all clogged. Elvis gets up out of his bed and goes, I got just the thing. And he goes into his room, he takes out this blue vial of liquid, and he takes a cotton swab and tells him to put it in his nose and breathe in. And it was like a medical thing. And David inhales and realizes this is medical grade cocaine, and Elvis was using it to clear his sinuses.
Oh, wow.
So doctors were prescribing him things as strong as cocaine as sinus medication to be able to clear his nose.
And the thing is, it's also interesting. I say in some ways too that Elvis was. I never like to say somebody's a victim because they're they're who they are, they're whatever, right. But in a way that celebrities can be victims of being famous. If that's a thing, if you want to talk about, I guess I would put it this way: when you're famous, they say when you're rich, they say more money, more problems, right? But like when you're famous, you have just new things you have to deal with.
Exactly.
You can't go anywhere without people recognizing you. You're constantly interrupted. You can take that as you could have gratitude for that. Like, hey, I'm thankful all these people support me and recognize me. I mean, it could also work the reverse if you're not a well-liked celebrity.
Exactly.
Right? So, but people hate you and they show up and they want to throw eggs at you. But at the same time, you're trapped a little bit as well by your celebrity. And when you're a performer and you're constantly going, so he recorded, I think it was over 700 songs. I want to say it was around 50 or 60 were like totally original Elvis songs. You can tell me if I'm wrong.
Elvis didn't write his music. He had songwriters, and a lot of them were covers of songs that he liked, and most of them weren't actually. They were songs that nobody knew, but Elvis knew them. Yeah. So Elvis made them, and he made them. Yeah, he made them famous. So, and then he had songwriters who would write songs for movies and whatnot.
Yeah. Performed 30. He produced 31 feature films. So if you think about the point I was trying to make is 700 something recorded songs, 31 featured films. Like I think he did a couple concerts. He also did some various tours, right? Like all these things. So he died at 41.
42.
42. So it's like, wow, like this person really between the ages of say like 18 and 42. Not to mention. Was it 2 years in the military?
Yep.
2 years abroad. And like, wow, this person was really worked to death in a sense, right? He was. But all the things he had to deal with, and then he's doing these Vegas shows, oftentimes 2 shows a day and this went on for like years.
Yeah, sometimes 3 shows a day. Sometimes the Hilton would give him an extra like $50,000 to add a 3 a.m. show.
Yeah.
And he would do everything.
Hard to say no. Yeah. And so he loved it, right? He loved being with the people. He loved it, all those sorts of things. Poured his heart and soul into it, and then being prescribed these uppers and downers, basically, to stay regular on this lifestyle. But regardless of whether those drugs were okay or whether they were like almost like cocaine, either way, like drugs you get addicted.
Yeah, there's
right?
no difference between prescription drugs and street drugs. The only difference is one is legal, one isn't.
Yeah,
and it's a way for big pharma who is in cahoots with every lobbyist and government person. It's a way for them to keep their control on the drug market. I mean, if somebody can prescribe you heroin just because you have money, why is that different than somebody buying heroin from a drug dealer? It's really not. It's just more within the control of the government.
Yeah, it's the power brokers.
Yeah.
So I have a friend of mine who's been on this podcast. I want to say it was somewhere in episode 20 something. We're now on like 117. So he's a good friend of mine, Evan Ernst. He's also a featured innovator in my new community, Fearless Journeys. He saw a little post I put up yesterday that I was going to be interviewing you, and he doesn't know who you are. He just saw my little do you have any questions about Elvis that maybe Matt can answer? So one of the things he told me, and I sent you the link actually to the article. And I never heard this before, that there's a theory out there that the reason Elvis died was because he had a genetic heart condition. And this has been, there's this article here about DNA analysis shows this. I don't know where they got his DNA. But anyway, when I sent that to you, I thought you had an interesting response. So I don't know what you know about this theory, but...
Right. So there is an author named Sally A. Hodel, a very nice woman. She actually sent me a copy of the book when it first came out for nothing, signed and mailed it to me because I was doing a podcast at the time, and said, hey, I just saw your podcast with Billy Stanley, or whoever I had interviewed that week. I think it was Billy, and sent me a copy of the book. And I just started reading it, and I was looking at this thing, and it said, okay, Elvis had this condition, this condition, and this condition from birth. I mean, his mother died at 47.
Mm-hmm.
His dad didn't live super long too. He was in his 60s. So yes, Elvis had his own health issues that were there from birth, but I think that a lot of this is a marketing ploy for books like this and people who want to push these theories. It's brilliant because it tells Elvis fans what they want to hear. Yeah. So for years, since the 70s, Elvis fans are wanting to point the finger at the Colonel or the entourage or the doctors or this and this and that. For Elvis's death, and they want to say, oh, it was this one and that one, and in reality, or now, it was his own health that he had from birth. It's a way of thinking in your own head that Elvis was perfect and he did nothing wrong in his life, and he was just either a victim, or B, destined to die young, and that it was just his fate, and it was going to happen whether he was famous or whether he made those bad decisions or not. But unfortunately, Elvis was addicted to these pills and was prescribed an enormous amount of pills that he was taking even though he knew how dangerous they were.
Not to mention he didn't live the healthiest lifestyle.
Exactly, yeah.
He was getting overweight. He was eating crazy stuff, so he didn't look the greatest near the end.
Yeah, exactly. There's
not to mention his mental health.
There's stories from Linda Thompson, who has an amazing book. She actually married Bruce Jenner after she broke up with Elvis, which is crazy. But yeah, interesting. It's very, very interesting choice.
That whole weird family tree, like Elvis's daughter Lisa Marie married Michael Jackson for a brief period. Yeah, I remember when that whole thing.
Bruce making her related to the Kardashians, and so
what a strange celebrity culture stemming from Elvis in some ways.
Very, very strange. But Linda told all these stories in her book that Elvis would ask her to go down and get him a popsicle. And she'd run down. She'd give him a popsicle, and he'd ask for another one, and another one, and another one, until he'd eaten like 3 boxes of popsicles. And she was like, honey, you really need to slow down. And he'd just get mad and say, no, go get me another popsicle. And if you won't, I'll go get somebody else to do it. Because unfortunately, if one person were to stand up to him, another person would give him whatever he wanted. If Dr. Nick would say, okay, you've had enough of these drugs, he'd go to Dr. Ghanem and he'd give him them.
Yeah, I think that's another downfall of being wealthy and famous, is a lot of things you kind of get used to things being on demand, exactly. And our whole culture is experiencing that right now. I mean, that Elvis was an exception at that point. Our whole culture today is everything we want on demand, right? And we kind of expect a lot that we take for granted.
I mean, if Elvis had Uber Eats, it'd be a nightmare.
Oh my Lord, yeah. So this is kind of a funny statement. I've made this before. I've thrown this on Facebook. People are like, Francisco, you're crazy. So I would say before I walked into Graceland, I was a big Elvis fan. When I walked out of Graceland, I was probably 100 times more of an Elvis fan. I think I say that because you got to be there. You got to see the whole story. I was there for, I don't know, 4 hours. I don't know how long I was there. I was there for a long time. I read everything.
Right.
I read so many letters. I went to the gravesite. I mean, it's a cool thing. Like you mentioned, when you go across the street and you go to that big megaplex thing, whatever you call that, they got so many of his cars. I remember walking into one room and seeing the 31 movie posters. And I was like, I knew Elvis did a lot of movies. He did 31 movies?
Exactly. And then 2 concert films on top of that.
Yeah, it was crazy. So I'm walking out. We're literally, my friend Ruth Malhotra and I were walking out of after the whole experience. We just called an Uber. We're standing there. And I was just like this mesmerized. And I said to Ruth, Ruth, I say this in all seriousness. I think Elvis Presley may have been the greatest American to ever live.
And I agree with that statement.
so of course you agree with that. So I say this so people ask me when I put that on there, they're like, Francisco, really? Like, he had some issues, right? Or something like what we just talked about. I said, well, first of all, here are so many parts of the Elvis Presley story. You mentioned this a couple times already. Almost very few people know this, like, unless they really follow Elvis' story, that he had a twin brother that died at birth. Like, there's something almost biblical about that. Like, when you see like stories of people who become legendary.
Right. And they didn't even know he was there because his twin brother was stillborn, and then all of a sudden they realized there was another baby coming. She didn't even know she was having twins.
Yeah, at that time you don't.
He was never expected.
You don't know it until it's happening.
Yeah.
So that was a cool thing that you mentioned about Uncle Jesse, the character on Full House, is named Jesse because John Stamos was an Elvis fan and wanted to be a character that was an Elvis fan. I never knew that. But the biggest thing is, obviously you take the rags to riches story of Elvis, seeing that IRS statement of Vernon Presley making $352 in 1943, and then $102,000. I mean, you're just like, this is the American dream, kind of like getting to not just be wealthy, but to explore your talent.
I mean, the racquetball court cost more than the house. Building the racquetball court cost more than the house did, which just tells you everything.
That's incredible. The other thing that really struck me was, they buy that house when Elvis is 22 years old. He's now one of the biggest stars on the planet at 22, and he moves his parents in with him. And I thought, who would do this today? What 22? Like, I'm thinking, I don't want to like judge anybody, but I'm thinking like Justin Bieber or like you just think of like whatever big, huge celebrity when they're like 22 and they've made it big, they're getting their own house. Mom and dad, I'll get you another house down, wherever you want it.
Who brings their mom, dad, grandma, and aunt with them?
Yeah, grandma and aunt too. Yeah, so just to me, I was like, that really struck me. So I tell people Elvis was a family man, and then they go, family man? He got a divorce. He may have slept with all these other women. There's no total proof on all that.
There were 2 very different Elvises, and David Stanley talks a lot about this in his book. He grew up with Elvis being a very, very conservative family man who had strong family Christian moral values. Then he'd go on the road, and what happens on the road stays on the road. And it's just like, this is a different side of me that nobody else sees. Just ignore it. And when I get home, I'm going to be a family man. Yeah,
and then, of course, you have the incredible talent, the incredible work ethic. Then what really struck me is, again, I knew the story that he had been drafted into the military, but really seeing kind of the full story when you're at Graceland and actually reading letters that were written back and forth between the draft board and Elvis. And I mean, I could like hear him speaking while I was reading these letters because I was like, this sounds like Elvis. And he's like postponing. He's like, I'm in the middle of shooting 2 movies. There's nothing greater that I want to do than serve my country. Can I just get like a 30-day extension so I could finish? Because I also owe a responsibility to these movie companies that have invested all this money in these movies. And I was like, what a reasonable request. I mean, you're literally like the biggest celebrity on the planet. And I was like, tell me if you have any insight onto this. I'm still like, why was Elvis Presley drafted in early 50s, whatever it was? Because I'm thinking very few Americans were being drafted at that point. There wasn't any imminent war threat other than we were sending people to a Cold War zone of West Germany. It almost seems conspiratorial to me. Whether it might be pro-Elvis conspiracy, it might be anti-Elvis conspiracy, but it just seems odd.
Yeah, so in the film, Elvis, they make it like the Colonel arranged it.
Yeah.
Which there's no factual backing to being that way. But it is a little bit coincidental. I've
also heard other people, I won't mention their names, tell me that as well. they think it was the Colonel's idea too.
Yeah.
Before the Elvis movie.
I mean, Colonel can't enlist somebody.
Right.
Yeah. I mean,
also, the Colonel was an illegal immigrant.
Exactly.
I didn't really think he is in cahoots with the government.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I don't think that's happening. So I really think that there was just a lot of people who were very concerned with what rock and roll was doing. I mean, rock and roll wasn't contributing to juvenile delinquency, a culture that other rock stars were pushing was. And not only rock and roll, I mean, juvenile delinquency was a problem in 1952 with The Wild One. The Wild One is with a bunch of raunchy jazz music. They said the same thing about jazz in the 20s. I mean, music does not contribute to juvenile delinquency. A culture of celebrities pushes juvenile delinquency.
Yeah.
And just because Elvis is the king of rock and roll does not make him a delinquent like some of the other rock and rollers. You look at Jerry Lee Lewis, that's somebody who contributed to juvenile delinquency.
So do you think there's a plausible theory that maybe the powers that be said, let's get this guy off stage and send him somewhere for 2 years?
I think so. I think there's a huge possibility that they were getting so many letters from parents, and there were people on TV every day saying that our country is sick and whatever. They thought, okay, this is an easy way out. And then Colonel gets word of this, and he thinks, this is brilliant. This is going to clean up his image. This is going to be the way that we get out of all the attacks. You're going to go into the Army. You're not going to accept their request for you to be in the Special Services. You're going to go in like everybody else. When you get out, you're going to be an all-American boy, and you're going to be able to sing songs with Frank Sinatra.
Yeah, and that's what happened. And I like your wording there. You're going to clean up your image, because it wasn't like he needed to clean up his act. He didn't change.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
It was his image that changed, and he came back. And then it seems like Hollywood made a great movie, G.I. Blues, with him. And so it seemed like they almost used the service. And at the same time, it almost seems like if I was plotting a conspiracy during the early days of the Cold War, I would take one of the greatest superstars on the planet that is one of our fellow Americans, and I would position him as an American military hero.
Exactly.
Right? And I would now it's funny though, because like I feel like it's been 70 years since that, and
nobody knows.
Nobody knows any conspiracy, but it just seems like everything.
You look at all the stuff the government was doing in the 50s.
Yeah.
I mean, there was some way crazy stuff they were doing.
Yeah.
I mean, the CIA, the FBI, they were doing some really weird stuff back then. That's all documented. And you think, okay, well, if they were literally trying to figure out mind control to compete with Russia, why wouldn't they draft Elvis Presley?
So, just like I said, it's hard to imagine a 22-year-old superstar today moving their parents and grandma and aunt in with them into their new home. It's also hard for me to believe that one of those superstars would, in the height of their peak of their career, go and serve in the military for 2 years. And even though they might have dribbled some songs and movies out while he was there, he didn't make anything new while he was there. It's hard for me to see somebody doing that today, and they're not. And obviously, there's not like a draft today. There could be tomorrow, for all we know. But that also seemed really interesting to me. Like, here's the guy who loved his country, expressed it, felt a debt of gratitude to his country because he got to use his talent to really have this rags to riches story.
And he was proud of his service too. I mean, it wasn't like he was dreading it in any way either, because when he was first drafted, he was going through basic training, and he had just finished all that. And before he was going to go off to Germany, serve his year and a half there, he was there for a year and a half. He was 6 months in Texas. And RCA called him and said, before you go off on your leave, we need you to record these songs, so when you're gone, we can dribble out these things. He showed up at the studio in full uniform. And they asked him, why are you in full uniform right now? You're on leave. You don't need to be doing this. Well, I'm proud of it. I'm sorry. He recorded One Night with You, one of the most sexy, seductive, provocative songs in the world, wearing an Army uniform.
That's great. Well, so he also made 31 movies, as mentioned, 2 concert films, but also I think his role, in a sense, and not that he was a political person. In fact, he seemed to try to stay out of political things.
In the public sense, he did not want to be a part of it.
But he, it seems like in the civil rights era, some people today might say, "Oh, well, white Elvis stole black music." Right?
You're Whereas get actually on this one, huh?
Yeah, I think the movie did a really great job in showing him his interactions with a lot of the, really, really, really great black musicians like B.B. King and many others, and how he took a lot of he did take what the black music he liked that he wasn't supposed to be listening to, and the people he wasn't supposed to be hanging out with, and he took it and he made it mainstream.
And he opened the door for them and made them millions of dollars and made them into icons.
I imagine those people got royalties.
Yeah, they did.
You're right, yeah.
They did. I mean, what's his name? The fellow who wrote Don't Be Cruel. Oh my goodness, his name is escaping me right now, but he wrote Don't Be Cruel, I'll Shook Up, Return to Sender. He wrote a lot of songs in the 50s for Elvis, and then I think Return to Sender was one of the last songs he wrote for him. In 1962, but he was writing a lot of these hit songs. If it was so easy to write songs for and make them successful songs, then why didn't you just record them yourself? Why did they not sell? It's because Elvis's version of That's Alright Mama is a whole lot better than Big Boy Crudup's version of That's
true
Alright
too.
Mama. I mean, Elvis took these songs and he made them hit songs. In 1969, there's a singer named Mark James who records at American Sound Studios with the house band with an original song and an original arrangement. The song is called Suspicious Minds. Elvis records the song less than a year later with the same musicians in the same studio in the exact same arrangement, completely identical to Mark James's version. Elvis is the #1 hit. Mark James's is never heard of. Mark James is white.
Yeah. So I kind of feel like in that era too, and I think it's portrayed well in the movie, is when he, after Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy are both killed in 1968, he's got this Christmas special in 1968, and him and his team, they come up with this song, If I Can Dream, and he delivers this surprise performance, and it's incredible. And it's interesting because when you look at the song, the music, Elvis's words, he doesn't have to say anything about a specific assassination, a specific political movement. He just cut through the culture with the music, and it spoke to people.
Exactly. It's such an incredible song. I mean, If I Can Dream was my favorite Elvis song for so long. Yeah, just the time that the country had gone through in like 1967 to 1972. So much happened, and the entire country was falling apart. But who stayed at the forefront, never made a political statement, kept the country together, and was still hailed as king when it seemed like every other celebrity was being torn down. I mean, you look at, you have all the Manson family stuff, and Nixon's having Watergate, and all these celebrities are going out there and just, frankly, being idiots with the stuff that they're promoting. I mean, the Beatles are going out there saying, oh, we're more popular than Jesus Christ and whatnot. And Elvis didn't do any of that. I mean, Elvis stayed good, clean, and wholesome in something that everybody loved at a time when our country was more divided than ever.
What I thought was interesting, I think this is in the Searcher documentary, they point out that when Elvis... so when Elvis comes back, he's gone for 2 years into the military, and music is rapidly changing, and the way people are getting it, and just the kind of music, the Beatles are now coming to America, all these sorts of things are starting to happen. And instead of like just adapting with the times, he does a little bit like there's different things he does, but they said, these people are producing much harder rock music. Elvis never really wanted to go that. He puts out a gospel album.
Exactly.
like who does that? He just decided to record music that he cared about.
Exactly. That's something that's so great about If I Can Dream. That song made him realize he never wanted to sing another song he didn't believe in. After all those movies where he was singing to turtles or bulls, he sang a song called Dominic to a bull in 1967. Right after that, he goes and he records If I Can Dream, and he decides from that moment on that he only wants to record the music that he wants to sing. And thank goodness he got out of the movie contracts, because Colonel was never one to say, you have to record this kind of material. You have to record this song. Colonel never did that. He always gave him creative license. But Colonel did sign movie deals where the directors would say, okay, well, we have this song to fit this scene. And, okay, I'm sorry, Elvis, you have to do it. You signed on to do this movie because you need the money, because you spend like a drunken sailor.
Yeah. So there's so many amazing things about the Elvis story that really came together for me when I was at Graceland, and when I walked out and made that statement. I think Elvis Presley might be the greatest American of all time. That's a lot of the things we just talked about are some of the reasons I say that, because all these sort of things come together in this one person at a really particularly interesting time in American history. I think you got to put him up there in one of the greatest Americans of all time. And again, his legacy still lives on,
Exactly.
And it's living on through Matt Stone.
Yeah. I mean, what's so great about Elvis is that it really is timeless. And you listen to Elvis's music of the 60s and 70s, it doesn't sound like any other song that's being recorded in the 60s and 70s. Suspicious Minds does not sound like a song from 1969. It's completely different. Elvis Presley is his own genre. It's not rock and roll or pop or anything else. His music is its own.
By the way, have you ever been to Stax Studios in Memphis?
I haven't, which is very disappointing, because when I was there for Elvis Week, we were about to leave Memphis the next day, and we were going to go to Stax. And unfortunately, I think it was like a Monday, and they're closed on Mondays.
I was there that week, and I highly recommend it. One of the things that I went there before I went to Graceland. One of the things that was really interesting that they pointed out was before Martin Luther King was killed in the 50s and 60s, white and black artists were all coming together. But the most interesting thing was we almost forget, living in a time we do now, that we have access to every song ever created in like 3 seconds on my phone on Spotify, Amazon Music, whatever. At that time, people didn't, right? I mean, people were getting recorded music, but it was very geographical based on where you're at. So where Memphis is located geographically, you're getting like the jazz coming up from New Orleans, the blues coming down from Chicago, the Motown in Detroit. You're getting the country music of Nashville and maybe Texas, a different kind of genre. You're getting all sorts of different music, and what's at the center of that is Memphis. That's where geographically located. And so, in a sense, for Elvis, from Tupelo, Mississippi to Memphis, he's being born and coming into his own in that time period.
He was bombarded by every kind of music that you can imagine at the time, and he took what he liked out of all of it, and he put it together to make something completely unique, which is why I don't like when people say that Elvis stole black music or that Elvis recorded black music, because music doesn't have color.
Yeah.
I mean, he took country music, which was primarily sung by whites. He took blues music that was primarily sung by blacks, and he put them together to create rock and roll. It's the same thing as saying that Chuck Berry stole white music because he recorded country music. He didn't steal white music. He recorded music that he liked.
So, Matt, I know we're deep into this interview here. I'm going to just ask you some really quick, let's call them like rapid-fire questions. Just quick answers here. As I mentioned, Elvis recorded like a lot, 700-something songs, whatever. What is your favorite Elvis song?
It's very hard to pick one, but Just Pretend and Bridge Over Troubled Water are my two favorites at the moment. Just
Pretend and Bridge Over Troubled Water. And you also mentioned If I Can Dream earlier, right? What is your favorite Elvis movie?
I used to say Follow That Dream and Change of Habit, but since I've done the G.I. Blues show and watched it over and over and over and over again, G.I. Blues has become my favorite.
G.I. Blues, yeah, that's great. Another question, where do you get your Elvis wardrobe, and how many different, I don't know if you call them costumes, but how many different pieces of wardrobe do you have?
So there's a couple different companies that make it. B&K Enterprises, AJM Elvis Costumes, and Pro Elvis Jumpsuits are the three main companies. I've been using a lot of stuff from Pro Elvis Jumpsuits for the jumpsuit side of things lately, and I've been using AJM a lot for the shirts. I have so much stuff, but when it comes to actual stage outfits that I'd be wearing in a theater, not my casual wear that I would wear at the Islander, I'm somewhere around 20 with that.
And do you perform any music outside of Elvis? Do you have a band, anything like that?
I don't. And when I first started out, I was being more Matt Stone, singing Elvis's songs or other music that I liked. And there's artists that I like, and they tend to be older artists as well. But there's nothing that I do on stage. It's just more me singing in the car. All
right. Speaking of movies, another just quick commentary. Have you seen the movie with Nixon and Elvis? I forget the name of the movie.
Yeah, there's a movie called Elvis and Nixon that came out with Kevin Spacey and Michael Shannon, and I thought that movie was so terrible. But there's another one called Elvis Meets Nixon. That was a TV movie made for Showtime in 1997 with Rick Peters plays
really?
Elvis. And I can't remember who plays Nixon, but it's a satire, and Rick Peters looks nothing like Elvis, but he plays the character unbelievably.
I'll have to go back and find that one. I once worked at the National Archives. I worked at the building that was in College Park, Maryland. It's called Archives 2 when I was in grad school. But there was a picture there that we gave out. Like, it was just sitting at the desk. And it was the picture of Nixon meeting Elvis. And they told me that is the reason we had so many just sitting there by the desk. It was the most requested picture at the National Archives. So, again, another reason Elvis might be the greatest American that ever lived. But Elvis went there seeking to help the government and Nixon fight drugs. So
it's amazing.
It's amazing irony.
Story.
Again, we could go on and talk about a lot of things. Oh, one last question I wanted to ask you regarding Elvis. You haven't been to RCA Studio B.
I haven't been to Studio B, which is so disappointing because
in Nashville.
we were going to go. Yeah.
So I don't know when people will be listening or watching to this podcast, because in less than 2 weeks from the time we're sitting here, I'm going to be leading a Fearless Journeys group trip to Nashville.
Great.
We're going to go to the Nashville Songwriters Association International. We're going to sit down with the executive director, Bart Herbison, on that trip. And I'm trying to remember what episode. I want to say I had him on episode 112 or something. So I'll get to actually meet him in person this time. We did it over Zoom. But right behind them is RCA Studio B, so we're going to tour that. I'm excited. Elvis recorded over 100 songs there.
Yes.
So these are some of the fun things we like to do on the Fearless Journeys community. So if people are listening or watching and want to be part of it, we do have some memberships, and also we do have some great group trips. Also doing a trip to Guatemala in December. That'll be our third group trip to Guatemala. And then I just announced a trip to Argentina and Uruguay for next March. So more trips coming. And maybe we'll have to do one to Memphis.
It's a good idea.
Because I think that's a
I'll
good
be your
idea.
Tour guide.
Yes, we'll have Matt with us. But Matt, last question for you. What is next for Matt Stone?
Really, the goal right now is to keep growing the venues. I mean, I've gone from playing senior homes to doing small theaters of a few hundred seats within, just a few years. Hopefully those few hundred seat theaters soon become, 2,000 seat theaters, and the audiences get bigger and the production gets bigger. Right now I'm working with a new band that we've booked a few shows with.
Oh, cool.
I'm actually going to be at the South Florida Fair on January 23rd, full band on the bigger stage.
South Florida Fair, that's West Palm Beach.
Yep.
On the big stage.
Yep.
What's going on there?
On the bigger stage. January 23rd, we're just doing the Elvis Presley Experience show, full band and all that. We're using the 5-piece band, so it's a rhythm section and a backing singer. I'd like, as the audiences get bigger and bigger and bigger, having a complete Elvis production.
Is that like your own shows or part of some kind of festival?
It's part of the Fair's concert series.
Gotcha.
So it's a full show, and it's my show that night, but it's part of their concert series. I think they're having like Van Halen one night.
So Matt Stone as Elvis on Facebook and YouTube, and then at Real Matt Stone on Instagram.
And MattStoneIsElvis.com.
And what's that?
MattStoneIsElvis.com.
MattStoneIsElvis.com. Can people book you privately?
They can.
Because I do know people that saw my post and said, I know people that wanted to have an Elvis impersonator. We're going to have to correct them, tribute artist. Come and perform at my birthday party or whatever it is.
Yeah, all the contact info is on the website.
Okay, awesome. So real Matt Stone as Elvis.com.
MattStoneIsElvis.com.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yep.
MattStoneIsElvis.com. All right. Well, thank you, Matt. And I think, by the way, I just want to say thanks for being on the Agents of Innovation podcast, and thanks for being an agent of innovation yourself.
Thank you very much for being one as well.
All right. Thank you.